Hi, and welcome to episode 86 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada.
I'm Heidi Parker. I'm a postdoc at the University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Tom Housley, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Exeter in Penryn.
Yeah. And this week we're going to go a little bit creepy. We're going to be talking about stuff that you probably don't want to listen to this episode while laying in bed. This is one that you're going to want to walk down through the park while you listen to, because we've got Brooke Borel, who is a contributing editor at Popular Science, as well as a freelance science writer, and the author of the new book, Infested, How the Bedbug Infiltrated Our Bedrooms and Took Over the World. So, good times coming up. So, thanks for joining us, Brooke. And with that cheery intro, I hope we can live up to it.
Well, it's funny that you said don't listen in bed. I actually have a lot of people that have sort of been upset. They normally read books in bed, and they've said, your book is not one that I can read in bed, so thanks a lot.
Yeah, so, I mean, I started reading this book, at bedtime, and then I quickly stopped reading it at bedtime and finished it on the dock at the cottage instead, where I knew I was not going to get creeped on too badly, so I can totally understand how other readers may be feeling.
Yeah, oh well, you know.
That's a good feeling. Ish. Ish.
Yeah, then you know your writing's really hit home. So I have to ask you, have you ever had bed bugs?
Well, you haven't read the book. I'm just kidding. I've had bed bugs 3 times in New York. First in 2004 in an apartment in Manhattan, actually in Hell's Kitchen. They weren't in the news yet. I kind of got them before they were cool, I guess you could say. And I didn't know what was going on, and it was really confusing. And I was really shocked to find out that it was bed bugs when we figured it out, because I never had realized that was an actual species. I just, I didn't know anyone who had ever had them. And then we got rid of them, and then I thought I'd never hear about them again, and 5 years later I got them twice in 2 different apartments in Brooklyn in the same summer. And then I started writing about them because I felt like that was some sort of sign.
Wow. Inspiration can come from anywhere, I suppose.
We were listing a mattress to sell, and I put in the Craigslist ad, Bedbug free. And my husband was like really against that, saying like, oh, no, you'll startle people and you'll alarm them. But I think that's, that's some good advertising. I would look for that and be like, well, if they said it, there's no bed bugs and there's no bed bugs, you don't have to be worried.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of mattresses on the streets. I mean, of course, I've seen a lot that have bed bugs. I've actually gone up and tried to look for bed bugs on mattresses that people have discarded, and my friends are like, what are you doing? But I also, a lot of times, will see mattresses that have little signs on them that say bed bug free, grab it if you want it, but I don't think anyone ever does.
Yeah, I guess it could be a trick. How did you get into science writing?
Well, there's a long version of that question, or that answer, that is probably too long for this, but the short version is that I've always loved science and I've always loved writing. I studied engineering undergraduate. I was a biomedical engineer major. And after I graduated, that felt, even though that you get to study a broad range of science doing something like that, or applied science, it felt very narrow to me because I love writing and I love humanities and social sciences and stuff. So I ended up in a master's program that kind of combined, it was sort of a build-your-own-adventure master's program, and it combined history of science and a little bit of science studies, looking at science from a cultural and social perspective, and I fell into journalism after I finished that program, basically.
So let's talk about Infested a little bit. The book is really, really good, and it actually did a lot to assuade a lot of my fears of bed bugs. I travel a lot as a grad student to conferences and collections and stuff like that, and I'm always super paranoid about bringing home bed bugs unintentionally. But you did a great job of showing that maybe that's not something I need to worry about as hardcore as I do. I mean, it's something to be concerned about. What was it like writing a book on one of the, I don't know, probably best-known insects currently going on, and also probably one of the most feared, even if there's maybe no basis for that fear besides mild annoyance?
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that it helped sort of make you less afraid for traveling and stuff, because that is something I've heard from other readers, and I'm glad, because I was hoping, for me, I mean, I I never had an outright fear of bed bugs, but they're definitely not pleasant to have. You know, they really can mess with you psychologically. And for me, working on the book was a little bit of a like exercising any of those fears, and it helped me to learn as much as I could about them. So I think it's nice that readers also had that experience, at least some of them. Others are like, I was on a radio show last week, and the woman was like, I really didn't like your book. She's like, it was really well written and everything, but it totally freaked me out. I was freaked out the entire time. I was like, oh, sorry. But I don't know if I answered your question or not. I mean, what was it like to write about this reviled pest that's so well known? It was interesting. I mean, I really enjoyed it. There were definitely moments where people that I didn't know very well at parties or whatever would ask me what I do. In New York anyway, that's like the first thing people ask you because that's all they care about. And I would tell them and they'd say, oh, what are you writing about now? And I would tell them bed bugs, and I would get a lot of strong reactions to that. And the people that have the strongest, most horrified reactions are the ones that would corner me for like an hour and ask me every single thing they possibly could think of. So I don't know, that's what it was kind of like.
So you were saying that you had bed bugs like several times in a few years, and it was before they were in the news. So I like that you have yourself as a kind of bed bug hipster. But is it that they're becoming more prevalent, or that they have been becoming more prevalent, and if so, why?
So yeah, I mean, there's the data on how more prevalent they're actually becoming is a little spotty. Some of it comes from industry data, like the National Association or National Pest Management Association, for example, does this big survey, or they have been for the past several years, where pest control operators will respond to the survey and say how many cases they've had in the last year or whatever. Based on that data, it seems to be going up, but also on some other studies here and there. And it seems like, even though they're not in the news as much as they have been in the past, it seems like they still are either rising a little bit or staying at least the same. Probably they don't seem like they're increasing because the media has finally gotten used to the fact that they're here. So now, I mean, you still see bed bug stories sometimes, but it's getting to be a little bit, I don't know, passé or something to write too many. It's not like, oh my God, there's a bed bug in the Empire State Building. That's not as newsy as it used to be, although you still see that sometimes. As to why they surge back, probably to answer that, we should go back to why they seem to sort of, they didn't really disappear, obviously, but why they decreased so much in the first place. So we may have lived with bed bugs for 250,000 years or somewhere around that. It might be a little bit less than that, but we've lived with them for a very long time. And right around World War II, or right after World War II, after the advent of DDT, or specifically after the insecticidal properties of DDT were discovered, DDT was commercialized in the US and beyond, and it was used pretty liberally. And it wasn't created as an insecticide for bed bugs, but it was really effective against them because it leaves a residue on surfaces. Bed bugs hide around the bed, or in cracks and crevices, wherever they can find. They like tight spaces. So having an insecticide that leaves a layer like that, a residue, for a long time was really effective against them, because they would come out from hiding, they would walk through that insecticide, collect it on their legs, and it would work its way into their body, into their nervous system. Whereas previously, all of the insecticides they would disappear more quickly. They were more fleeting. They were, fumigants and that kind of stuff, like cyanide gas and all kinds of nasty stuff. So we were able to knock their numbers down pretty considerably after World War II. There was DDT impregnated wallpaper, and there were varnishes and paints and powders and all kinds of stuff. But of course, people were overusing it, so you started seeing resistance in little pockets here and there. There's tobacco studies, resistant bed bugs popping up all over the world. But still, numbers were overall down. Then, flash forward, and it's not really clear why it took so long for this to happen, but sometime in the late 90s or 2000s, you started seeing them again more commonly. And there are a few things that probably contributed to this. There might be other things, but one was that it got a lot easier and cheaper to travel by plane. In the US, the airlines were deregulated, and it made it just cheaper and easier to fly. There were more choices for flights. Flights went up. There were more passengers. And internationally, that happened in the 90s, thanks to these open skies agreements. So you do see an increase in international travel as well. Bed bugs are really good at hitchhiking. So wherever they were hiding out in these pockets of resistance wherever they were able to spill beyond those confines more easily. We also have more people on the planet than ever before, so there's more food because they only eat blood. And that particular species, Cymex lectularius especially, is associated with our blood. And more of us are living in cities than ever before. More than half of the world's population lives in urban spaces, and bedbugs can go anywhere, but they're especially good at spreading in cities. If I get bedbugs in my apartment building, it's much easier for them to go to my neighbors, either through the walls or across the hall or whatever, than it is if you're in the suburbs going from one house to another. So all these things, and then the resistance thing also came back. We can't use DDT anymore, but we use the main insecticides we're legally allowed to use at least in the US, and a lot of other places too, although there's a few more that they're allowed to use depending on where you are in the world. But the biggest class is called pyrethroids, and they work similarly in the nervous system as DDT. So all of those bed bugs and their offspring that were DDT resistant are often cross-resistant with pyrethroids. And so you have that also adding to this. It's harder to control them. That was a really long answer to your question.
I had also thought, you have all these things about, how little populations invade new ecological niches, but I guess they don't actually have to invade new niches because it's always just where humans are, and it's in our rooms, and as long as we take them in there, then.
Yeah. I mean, they're very cosmopolitan, and I mean, pretty much anywhere you go, if you're in a big city especially, you're going to be in an environment, in a home that's going to be kept at a pretty steady range of temperatures and humidity and all these things. They do well in the environments that we do well in because they've evolved with us. So, yeah.
I also have to ask, and regular viewers of the podcast will be unsurprised by this. Did you try and freak out the people who didn't like bedbugs more by telling them about their sex lives?
I mean, I couldn't not talk about sex lives because people love to hear about it, or they ask about it a lot, right? So I do have at least a page that's talking about that in the book. And actually, my husband's company made a book trailer for the book that's this animation, and there's some bedbug sex there, and I've been showing it at the talks I've been giving, and also I have a huge picture of bedbugs having sex that I show people like what's going on. The last place I did that talk, it was supposed to be a happy hour, like after hours museum thing, but a bunch of people brought their little kids. So I was like, okay, just so you know, I'm about to talk about bedbug sex, so if anyone is uncomfortable with that. But there are these little boys in the front row, like covering their mouths, and you're like, she said sex with bedbug penis. And their parents were like, some of their parents were totally cool with it, and some of them were like, crazy bug lady.
Yeah, that's their first exposure to
I know. Bedbugs and the bees, I guess.
It's such a better understanding of the wide world of sex.
They're going to be really confused, actually.
I pity their future partners.
Yeah. Obviously, as you can tell, bedbug sex has come up before, and longtime listeners will maybe remember back to a couple years ago when we actually talked to Michael Sivajothy, who makes appearances in your book, and we talked to him about stabby cock daggers and all sorts of other things as well. So, one of the running themes through the book, which I particularly, as a taxonomic entomologist, appreciated, was the work of Robert Usinger and how you carried on his ideas, and especially some of his early, or rather his some of the bigger pieces of his work, since he died fairly young, throughout the book, and kept calling back to taxonomy and museum-based biology and all that stuff throughout. What was it about Robert's story and his big tome on bedbugs that maybe led you to use that as one of the central themes throughout?
It took me a while, actually, to figure out that I wanted to continue his story sort of as a thread through the entire book. I mean, I definitely wanted to include him somewhere because, first of all, he wrote that book and he traveled all over the world collecting bedbugs on, I think it was 5 continents over a really long period. It was like an 18-year stretch that he was working on that monograph. And that was really interesting. And in the introduction, he mentions some of the adventures he experienced while working on it, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And as I was reading that, I had already had a plan. I had a trip planned to California for a wedding like a month later. And so I started Googling him, and I found the Essig Museum at Berkeley that has his collection, or at least part of his collection, and I was going to be right there, so I arranged to go visit it. They were like, "What are you doing here?" They brought out a microscope, and they were like, "Here you go." I was like, "Oh, I don't really need that." And they're like, "What are you?" But they were really nice, and it was really interesting to see that. And then the more I read, he kept popping up so many places. They also gave me a copy of his autobiography, which is a little tough to read because it actually was just him dictating it in the last, I don't know, right before he died, because he did die of cancer, and was sort of collecting his things and making sure he finished that in time. So it's just that transcribed and I think lightly edited, so it's a little hard to follow. It's a little rambling at times because it wasn't, a professional biography that was edited and stuff. But reading that, and I was able to pull some really interesting stories out of that, and that's when I realized some of the work that I was doing could potentially take me to some of the places he had been, and I thought that would be a nice. You're always looking for threads when you're making a narrative, and you're always looking for a way to not just have it be a bunch of stories that are, if it's just a big collection of stories, then maybe it shouldn't be a book. Maybe, I don't know. There are some books like that work really well, but there has to be something, some glue holding it together. And so he ended up being part of that glue, one of those strands, whatever metaphor you want to use. So I started looking for places that he had been that I could also perhaps go to, and I had a few on the list, but he wanted to go to Czechoslovakia to look at these bed bugs that were living in these caves and these church attics and stuff. And he had been planning that trip when he died. He actually had to cancel the trip when he started getting really sick. And it just so happened that some of the researchers that I was talking to were collaborating with researchers there, and in a way they actually were continuing his work. They were, I actually went into some of these attics and these apartment buildings to collect bed bugs off of these, that were living with these bats. So it was a really long process, to answer your question in a shorter way. It was a long process to figure out that I wanted to do that, but it did end up working out really nicely once I finally put all of those pieces together.
Yeah, it was definitely very cool, especially the part, like you mentioned, when you got to do some of the field work that he had dreamed of doing 60 years prior.
Yeah.
So, well, I guess I got to ask now, what was it like doing field work? This is your first experience with entomology field work, it sounded like. How did you find the experience, especially with dealing with something that most people don't want to film by accident?
I haven't done I haven't done formal field work, anything like that, but as a kid, I had an insect collection as a kid. I used to go to all these science camps every summer to study all kinds of different things, so I do love that kind of stuff, and I was just expecting to enjoy it and not be intimidated, but the bats actually were really, so I was in this attic and I had 1,200 bats above me, and they were actually a little more intimidating than the bugs because they were really loud and they smelled, just sort of a sensory overload. So I was kind of like hiding out and taking notes. I was like, oh, I need to take some notes and let you guys handle that because I needed some space before I could sort of like jump in. But then once all of that once I got used to all of that, it became a little less scary, and I was like, okay, the bats aren't gonna like run into my head or anything. I don't know, bats are really good at sensing things, right? So if they run into my head, that's kind of a bad thing. I don't think they're gonna do. So I was able to get over that and go in and collect the bugs, and then it became kind of fun because it's like I mentioned in the book, it became sort of a game where I was trying to do it relatively quickly because we only had a short amount of time, and you're catching bugs. It's like your inner child comes out when you're doing that, I think, even if it's bed bugs and not something a little bit more socially lovable.
Yeah.
I want to follow up on that last point just and let you step away from bed bugs briefly, because I was reading your blog and on our modern plagues, and I really like the last post that you had on the Burning Man infestation and the kind of how the media and the public at large has this huge and quite extreme range of emotions when it comes to talking about insects.
Yeah, that was fun to write. I actually, I was so bogged down in deadlines last week, and actually the editors there, usually I come up with my own story ideas, but every once in a while there'll be something that they know that they'd like to cover and they know that I would probably like to write. So yeah, it was actually the editors there who said, you should write about this. And by the time we decided to do it, I'm really glad the way it worked out, because I probably would have had an angle like this anyway, but it worked out so that my story came later than most of them, but it gave me some time to sort of analyze the other coverage and find, like, people are calling this grotesque and super gross and all this stuff. So I enjoyed writing that very much.
Yeah, it was nice to see somebody take an actual measured approach to it, rather than the huge icky thing that was sweeping the hipster web, or whatever Burning Man people are. I don't really know. Yeah, that was an interesting situation, anyways. But you did a great job with it. And like I think I tweeted at you that the May Berenbaum quote that you got right at the end was killer. So.
Well, she was great. She had a couple of great quotes. She also said something about, I was asking if you could tell species level from a photograph, which I kind of knew you couldn't, because I get photographs. I have so many people now that email me or text me pictures like, is this a bed bug? And I'm like, that's a speck. I don't know what that is. I don't know. I can't tell. But she had a great quote where she was explaining how sometimes you have to look at genitalia to really identify an insect, and she said something like, that's not even going to happen at Burning Man, and I thought that was also pretty great.
Right on point.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about some of your other freelance work. We'll leave your book alone for now. Make sure that everybody at home goes out and buys a copy and reads it and feels better about bed bugs when they travel.
Let's buy the book.
Yes, make sure you buy the book. There's also an awesome playlist in the back of it, so you can take bedbug music with you while you're running. So that's an added perk of books that you don't normally
Actually,
get.
one funny story about that, I was on another radio show in San Francisco earlier this summer, and I thought I was only going to be on for like 20 minutes, but it ended up that I was the only guest for the whole 2 hours. And it was also a music show. Like the guy who does it, it's like music and culture and science. And he told me to bring some music I liked, so I brought all bedbug songs. And towards the end, he was like, we're going to play some more music, but you can play something other than bedbug songs. And I was like, that's all I got. And so he just gave more, because that's all I have on my computer. I do listen to other music, but I don't know. Anyway, we can talk about something else now.
Sounds good. So you do, well, that was a poorly phrased sentence. You do write about a bunch of other stuff other than insects. You do have a column, or you do contribute to the magazine Popular Science with features from time to time as well. I'm going to, as I say, you do write about other insects. I'm going to bring up the edible insects post story that you just published this spring as well, because I thought it was really interesting. So what did you find with the edible insect community and the entomophagy community? Because you go through a lot of the commercial side of it, which I think was a really cool thing. I've heard a lot of people talking about, and had a lot of people email me personally saying, I want to start up this new startup about, eating crickets. Tell me everything you know about insects. And I'm like, it's not my business, man. So what was it like getting into that community and kind of finding this new frontier of fast food?
Yeah, it was interesting, and actually, originally I just wanted to write a story about what was happening, but not the business side so much. And then I pitched it, and then there was just sort of a glut of stories all of a sudden. Like, there were that happens a lot. A lot of other reporters kind of came across the same thing, and they were writing about it. So I actually, to try and find another angle, that's why I ended up focusing on the startup thing, because I think that is something that's contributing to why this is sort of taking off a little bit now, because people have been talking about this in the US for a long time, for decades, and worldwide, obviously, this is something that's been happening in other countries and other cultures and all over the place for a very long time. So I think that there is something interesting happening. It's sort of those social media campaigns and crowdfunding and stuff that is not all of the startups do that, but it's a very attractive thing for startups. I think just the opportunity and the fact that those things exist make it easier for people, like-minded people that are interested in that sort of thing. You might have health food people, I guess people that are into the paleo diet or whatever are really into baked goods that are made with cricket flour. You have people that want to bulk up on protein or in sort of the CrossFit world. You have people that are interested in environmental sustainability, and all of them are able to find each other through this, and those companies are able to find their base and like the people that are going to be their customers. So I think that all that sort of working together is really interesting to see that sort of commerce working out for entomophagy. I don't know if that's what you were asking, though. As far as going into the world, I mean, I think that it's a really interesting community. I think that it's probably a little optimistic on how big of an impact this is going to have and how widely accepted it's going to be, and also just how big of an environmental impact it might have. But I think that it's too soon to tell for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with all those things from what I've seen. I think they've got a very, very long hill to push, a very big boulder up to start breaking into the weird classes of people that are currently interested in it. Weird in quotation marks for those that are listening and couldn't see that. I'm not trying to be a jerk intentionally. But I don't know. Tom did his whole PhD with crickets. I don't know if he's on board with eating his study organisms or not.
Do you know, I actually haven't. I took some home to eat once for, I was going to cook them up when I had some friends over for a dinner party, but unfortunately I went out the night before and got super drunk, and then I was so hungover that I was just looking at those little crickets in the freezer and just thinking, I can't do
it. I had them a few different ways when I was working on that story, and in some, like when they're sort of roasted and dry, I think they're pretty good. Some of the baked goods are decent, but to me they're like pretty heavy. I mean, they're like pretty. It's not the same as just having a granola bar. There's this other heft to it, I guess because of all the protein. But I also had them sautéed in garlic, and I did not like those. They were, I don't know, plump and moist in a way. Unpleasant.
Not quite shrimp.
The ones that really always get me are when you see on TV the people eating those massive beetle larvae where they just like squidge open and.
Yeah, I haven't had those.
Palm weevils might be a little bit too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how people continue, like they keep making sweet products out of a meat flour essentially. So you see all these reviews or all these companies or media empires being like, oh, we're going to try something new and crazy, and we're going to bake with some cricket flour, and then they make cookies, and they're like, oh, this doesn't taste very good. But it's like, well, you don't put bacon regularly in your chocolate chip cookies anyways, so maybe try making something else.
Yeah, it seems like it needs to be in something savory, like sprinkle some of that in a stew, or I don't know. I think there are probably some better ways to perhaps use it, but
yeah, I think it'll need some work before it really takes off, but hopefully there's some opportunities there.
Yeah.
So do you have plans for another book, or are you waiting for more infestations to hit you? Or?
That's a good question. My agent would love for me to have an answer for that. I did just turn in another book in July, but it's a different kind of book. It's a book about fact-checking. And it's more of a guide for, it's the University of Chicago Press, which also published Infested, but it's a different division. It's a division that does their manual of style. So they were looking for a fact-checking guide sort of to have with that, in that same arena. So eventually, hopefully, it'll be on journalism school syllabuses and newsrooms and, freelancer bookshelves, anywhere else, anyone that needs to know how to fact check and how that normally works. But as far as I'm working on some different ideas for my next popular science book, but I haven't landed exactly on what I want to do yet.
Yeah. The fact-checking book sounds very cool, and you'll probably know from Twitter that every scientist there will be delighted if every journalist has a copy of a fact-checking book.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it was very fun to work on. I interviewed, I have worked as a fact checker, but it's not just based on my experiences. I interviewed almost 90 people for it. I interviewed the head of research from the New Yorker and Vanity Fair and National Geographic and a bunch of outlets like that, and also fact checkers that are earlier in their career at a bunch of different outlets. So yeah, it was fun. I hope it'll be a good tool for people.
So what does it actually, without getting like too deep into the weeds about it, what does fact checking entail? Does it go into the statistical realm, or?
Well, I mean, journalists aren't necessarily going to have, it depends on what the journalist's expertise is, right? It's that you're not going to be able, we write about so many different things, even if your specialty is science. I mean, that's a lot of stuff, right? Even if your specialty is within, like, I have somewhat of a beat, but it's impossible for me to be an expert in all those things. So part of it is also just trying to understand what good sources are, including good people to talk to, where if you don't understand some statistics, here are some ways you can find someone to help you sift through it. That sort of thing as well. I mean, fact checking is really a process that more traditionally in journalism has sprung up in the magazine world. It's not something that's typical. And when I say fact checking, usually it's a third party. It's a different person than the writer and the editor who's going through everything and all the sourcing, kind of kicking the tires to make sure the story holds up. So this book is sort of taking advice from people that do that in magazines, and also people that are starting to do it in other realms. Like there are some narrative radio shows that do fact checking now, in that more formal sense, and pulling together like how that works, so that you can apply it to other media or even to your own writing, which isn't ideal. It's better if you have some other person doing it for you. But at the very least, if you don't have that luxury, because it can get expensive and most outlets, especially online outlets, do not do it. It's a way to sort of think about these things in your own writing. Just take a step back and, am I good at using good sources? Have I reread this? But it's really hard. Going back to the Infested, going back to the Bedbug book, I fact-checked that entire book myself. And I made some mistakes, actually. For example, on, I don't know, page 162 or something like that, I had one person point out that I called the parasite that causes Chagas disease, I called it a virus. And I know it's not a virus, but it just was a slip of my, type the wrong thing, and then you read it 10,000 times and you just glaze over it. So I ended up hiring a fact checker for the fact checker book.
You fact check the fact checker book. That's all kinds of meta.
Jokes about whether we joked all about the meta experience of hiring a fact checker to fact check a fact checking book. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, not knowing that you were an expert on fact checking, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit here because it's something that I think is really cool. Do you think we'll see more fact checking or independent fact checking, like you were talking about, cropping up in in some of these new media locations, the BuzzFeeds, the Gawkers, that sort of thing, or do you think it's going to fall more and more on the shoulders of the individual journalists?
So in the past, outlets like newspapers, for example, or daily news reports on TV, they haven't employed independent fact checkers because they just don't have time. So and they also can correct things more quickly. So in a newspaper, before the internet, when people got their news in the newspaper, you could run a correction the next day or even in the afternoon edition or whatever. And that wasn't so with magazines. It could take a couple months to run a correction. So that seems to be why it sprung up in that realm. The internet, I mean, most of those outlets you just mentioned, some of them are doing really great investigative long-form pieces. But a lot of it also is on that sort of daily news cycle, like a newspaper, and I do sympathize with them because it's doing a fact check on that just isn't always possible, and it's also expensive, and it's just not, it's not always how you can get the story up. But those reporters should still be double checking things before they go live. There's all kinds of examples of people sort of jumping the gun on stories because they want to be first and getting it wrong and having some pretty bad consequences. So I don't know the answer to your question. I hope that I hope that all the reporters in the world buy my book and I will learn from all the people I interview and how to apply those kinds of tactics to their own writing. Whether they will or not, I don't know. When I was working on this book, and I even say this in the intro, everyone that I told that I was working on this book, they'd say, "Oh, this is a great time for this book. Look at all this stuff that's happening right now. Look at Brian Williams. Look at the Rolling Stone debacle with UVA and the rape story. All of that stuff." But you could go back in time, and almost every year you could name just as many things. Like a couple years ago, it was Joan O'Lear, and it was this and that. So I think it's going to be a conversation that's going to continue forever, and it's always going to be something that's important, and it's always going to be something that some people are doing and some people aren't.
Yeah, it's a good point that you only ever hear of the cases where fact-checking fails or misses stuff. You never ever hear of, you know, the near misses, the stories that were corrected at the 11th hour with the correct info, or you never hear everything in this story is correct. Let's make a big media deal out of this every single thing.
They got this one right. That's interesting. You should say that. There's actually a book. I hope I don't mess up the title. It's The Invisibles, I think it's called, and it's actually by this guy David Zwig. I also hope I didn't just mispronounce his name, but he is a former fact checker, and it's about jobs like that that are important and fulfilling, but that you don't get recognition for, because the only time that people recognize that it's even something that happens is when you mess up. Fact checking is one of those things. He also talks about, I think he talks about civil engineering for like big skyscrapers, all kinds of things like that, sort of these invisible jobs that people have that no one, airport design, like the signs in an airport. You never notice the signs in an airport until they're not good and you get lost, right? So, interesting book if anyone is looking for something like that.
Cool. Just make sure that you buy Brooke's Infested and fact checking as well. Package them together on Amazon and do a big deal.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're pretty much out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there, but that was really great. Brooke, where can people follow along with all of your different pieces of writing and learn about updates on fact-checking when that hits the market?
All of my handles online are pretty boring and the same. I'm at Brooke Borel at Twitter. My email address is brookeborel@gmail.com. My website is brookeborel.com. Yeah, that's pretty much it. They can find me in any of those places. Or at Popular Science at Our Modern Plagues. I try and get a post up every week, although that doesn't always happen.
That's good. But at least everybody knows where to find you, and that SEO is working for you like no other.
Yeah, exactly. Branding.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again, Brooke, for joining us this week. It was great talking to you about all things bugs and fact-checking. For everybody listening at home, remember, go check out Infested, how the Bed Bug infiltrated our bedrooms and took over the world, which is out right now, and check out Brooke's stuff online as well. We need to thank the European Society for Evolutionary Biology for providing us some outreach funding to help us communicate all these cool things from us to you. And we want to remind you that you can find us on Twitter at Breaking Bio. You can find us on Facebook by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. And you can find links to all the stuff that we talked about today, as well as all of our past episodes at our website, which is breakingbio.com. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as well if you want to take us with you on that walk rather than sitting in bed watching this on YouTube talking about bed bugs. I think that's just about it for this week. We'll be back next week with a new guest. But until then, don't let those bed bugs bite.